Welcome back to the Commercial Connections podcast. Today we're doing another Multifamily Minute where Rene and I break down what's happening in the Eugene Springfield multifamily market and explain what it means for owners. Today's topic is rent control in Oregon. We hear this question constantly. Did rent control just change? Did it get tighter? So today we're focusing on facts, not just the headlines.
And that's important because this topic creates more unnecessary stress than almost anything else I'm hearing from my clients right now.
So, why do you think rent control feels so front and center for owners right now?
Because there's a lot of pressure hitting at once. Expenses are higher, margins are thinner, and regulations are louder and tougher. When owners feel squeezed, anything with the word control immediately raises alarms. And I will add that New York just put in the new mayor in New York,
Yeah.
and he is going to put in the rent control. And we're going to talk about the difference between their rent control and our rent control.
Okay.
But when you read those headlines as Eugene Springfield property owner in Oregon, you get sweaty palms.
Yeah, I am really interested to hear the difference in the rent control here and there, and just to ease some people's minds, hopefully, with this episode. So, it's not that the law suddenly changed, it's that the environment did.
Exactly. The framework for rent control has been around since 2019. What's changed is how important it is to understand it clearly.
So, let's simplify this. Does Oregon have rent control?
No, Oregon has rent stabilization, which is very different from traditional rent control.
What's the difference between the two?
Well, traditional rent control actually freezes rents and sets specific prices. So that's what is potentially going to happen in New York. Oregon doesn't do that. Instead, the state limits how much rent can be increased each year for existing tenants.
That's so interesting. So that was like during COVID, we had rent control freezes, but it wasn't rent stabilization.
That's right. There were freezes that were put in place, and that was more nationwide because they really wanted tenants to stay in place and not panic. And so a lot of landlords agreed to it up front, but then a lot of the states put it into place also just to try to protect tenants so that they weren't taken advantage of.
So with rent stabilization, owners still have flexibility, right?
Well, they do within boundaries.
So let's talk specifics. What's the rent cap in Oregon for 2026?
For most residential properties, the maximum allowed rent increase for 2026 is 9.5%.
And that number isn't random, right?
Nope, it's calculated every year, and it basically uses a formula that's either the lesser of 10% or 7% plus CPI, which is Consumer Price Index. And this year, inflation cooled just enough to land below that 10% ceiling.
So rents aren't frozen.
That is correct. That's a ceiling, but there's still movement because we should talk about what happens when a tenant moves out because that gives an owner options.
So does the cap apply to every apartment building?
No, most apartment buildings that are 15 years or older fall under that rent cap, but newer construction is generally exempt. So when you see new construction, what they're trying to do is entice builders to build. And so in order to do that, they agreed when they created this rent control or rent stabilization bill, they agreed that they would not put any rent caps on new construction.
And is vacancy decontrol, is that still a part of the system?
Well, that's one of probably the most understood points. When a unit turns over, an owner can reset rents to market.
And that alone changes the way owners should think about the strategy?
It absolutely does, because when they created the rent stabilization, what was happening was investors were coming into Oregon from out of state, primarily California, and they were buying apartments and they were just jacking rent super high. And we saw this a lot in the Portland market. And so they realized pretty quickly there wasn't enough new construction happening. And so the governor and the people in legislation realized that we were about ready to experience an even bigger housing crisis than we're in right now. Because if rents keep increasing and there was no cap, they were afraid that they were just going to price tenants out of the market. So that's why they came together. And it was a battle between landlords and legislation and the governor and different people. And we went back and forth negotiating on where the rent cap should be. But that definitely was one thing that, in my opinion, stabilized the market, where these out of town investors couldn't come into the market. And literally, they would buy an apartment complex that was built in the 70s and give everybody a 30-day notice that they were going to jack rents like 20 or 30%. And if you're, say, maybe a single mom and you're working a minimum wage job, how are you going to move overnight? I
Yeah.
mean, you got two kids, you've got to pull money together for your rents and security deposits and next month rent. And it was crazy. And so when the rent stabilization went into play, it did two things. It gave tenants peace of mind because they knew their landlord couldn't just raise rent randomly. And it also helped the owners know, okay, now my tenants are going to stay in place. I have dependable rent income. But when that tenant moves out, then you know that you can reset back to market rate. And it especially helps if you renovate, if you go in and not just put new paint in, but actually renovate and improve the kitchen, improve the bathrooms, then you really can compete with market rents.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm really excited because I think we're going to have Doug Palmer back in a couple of weeks. And he's going to be talking about different inspections, things to look out for, deferred maintenance. And yeah, you really can't set that. I mean, you can try, but setting that apartment at above market rate with deferred maintenance probably isn't going to get you very far.
I agree. I recently had an out of town investor that tried that in the University of Oregon area. They gave notice to all the tenants, they paid relocation fees. They went in and they did a good job renovating, but they jacked rents super high. And unfortunately, they're not able to hit their rent numbers because it's mid year. So all the students are already in existing leases. And believe it or not, the students are actually signing leases for this next school year. So it's next year's rent. But the buyer that did this is already starting to see that the market has softened and they're not going to be able to get those high rents. So their appetite has changed. And now they're in Florida buying property that they can do those type of renovations and jack rents substantially in other states. And it doesn't specifically has to do with rent control, but it circles back to the fact that if you are a market rate property owner, you can't just go in and say, oh, I'm going to, look on Craigslist and you look at the top rent and think, well, I'm going to charge that top rent. You better make sure that your property compares neck and neck from both curb appeal, on-site parking, availability to amenities, bus line in case your tenant needs to ride the bus to get to work and for lifestyle. And then what's the interior condition look like? So there are some things that play into what you're able to actually hit. It's one thing to do it in theory. It's another thing to actually get someone to come in and rent from you.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice for Oregon multifamily owners out there. So let's talk about the new legislation that's been lumped into rent control.
Yeah, that's House Bill 3054. And it's important to be precise about who it applies to because I've had several of my owners who have been talking about selling and they've called recently and said, oh, did you hear that rents are capped at 6%? And I said, what are you talking about? And I knew it was that, but I was testing them to I said it in a more polite tone, but you know what I mean? I was testing them to find out, where are you getting your information? And come to find out, they had just read some stuff on the internet.
So, who does this House Bill 3054 apply to?
So it applies to manufactured home parks and floating home marinas, which in Eugene, Springfield, we really don't have floating home marinas. That's more in the Portland area. But we definitely have mobile home parks, and those are referred to more like facilities in nature because they're a little bit of like a community
Mm-hmm.
where often you'll have a little manager's office, but it's more like a community, but the state calls it more of a facilities in nature. So
Yeah.
that's who it is addressed to.
What's changing for those types of properties in 2026?
Well, facilities or mobile home parks and floating marinas with more than 30 spaces, their rents are going to be capped at 6%. And facilities, again, mobile home parks or floating marinas with 30 or fewer spaces will follow the 9.5% rent caps.
Okay. And so this new rule is not for multifamily apartment owners.
No. So everyone that's listening that thinks that the state was going to cap out rent at 6% this year, that's not correct. It's only if you have a manufactured home park or a floating marina.
I'm sure you had some really nervous apartment owners calling you when that
Oh
news dropped.
man. I literally was out for a walk one afternoon and I got a call from one of my favorite clients. And it was between heavy breathing, almost in a paper bag, and tears that she was fighting back. Like, do you realize that we were going to sell our property this year? And you and I have been talking about numbers, and now they're going to cap us at 6% for rent increases. That's going to just shoot us down the tubes. And it's like, no, that doesn't apply here. So, for the listeners, the reason that this is important is the old days where a buyer would buy a property and look at pro forma rent or say, oh, I could buy it today at this price and then go in and renovate, and I can increase rent up to, say, I could buy something with $800 a month rents per unit. I could renovate it and then I could jack the rents to 12 or 1500. Buyers are saying, no thanks, I don't want that. You do it, Mr. Seller, you renovate, then I'll buy it from you, or I want the discount up front. So if the rent stabilization or rent cap goes from 9.5% to 6%, that makes a huge difference. And I will say, unfortunately, mobile home parks are seeing that impact them.
Wow.
Yeah, mobile home parks used to be something that everybody loved. They called them cash cows. They're almost like laundromats
Mm-hmm.
because with mobile home parks, a lot of them, the tenant owns the actual mobile home structure.
Wow.
So, as an owner, you just own the pad
Yeah.
where they're setting, and then you have to manage the park itself and the road and the
Mm-hmm.
facility as far as where the electrical comes in and out. Compare that to an apartment
Yeah.
complex where you have a tenant in there. If their toilet breaks, if their shower starts to leak, you're fixing all that in maintenance and repair. But a mobile home park, the tenant owns that mobile home, so they're fixing that. So that's why for years and years they've been a cash cow and really desired in the market, but that's changing now.
Yeah, that is really interesting because I know we've worked on a few properties together, and some other friends of yours in the industry. I've seen those come across their portfolios for sale as of recently. And I mean, that's a huge impact now. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens going forward with those mobile home parks. And if you're listening and you want to understand how this affects your property specifically, Rene is offering free pinpoint price evaluations today. You can also download the Eugene Springfield Apartment Market Snapshot at apartmentpricereport.com. That's APT pricereport.com. And we also have the U of O Apartments Market Snapshot at uoapartmentprices.com. That's uoapartmentprices.com.
For those of you that are driving, Brittany will put that in the show notes.
So, why does this matter strategically if the framework hasn't changed?
Because rent caps can influence how buyers underwrite and how lenders assess risk and how owners should be thinking about the timing.
And expenses aren't capped.
Right. See, that's the pressure point. When expenses rise faster than allowable rent, the strategy matters because we are seeing property insurance as an example. That's increasing right now by about 20% annually. So when a new buyer is coming in, you have to look at the insurance and think, well, that's what the owner is paying today. But when the sale occurs, my insurance premium is going to be 20% higher.
That is way, way higher than I thought it was increasing annually. So
Yeah, it's
not
pretty
loving
crazy.
that.
And I'm going to add one other one because we've had Zoe Schwartz, who's an MAI appraiser, on our podcast before. And I had coffee with her the other day, and we were talking about the average maintenance and repair cost. And she was doing an estate appraisal for someone, and she had to look backwards to 2019 when that person passed away. And she was looking at maintenance and repair. So this was for market rate, just an average, 2 bedroom, 1 bath. Back then, the maintenance and repair was about $800 per unit. And now it's close to $1,600 in today's dollars. And so the maintenance and repair expenses are also going up.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we had COVID since then and more like material costs going up, builder costs, but I mean, I find it harder to believe that's the only thing that led to that height of a spike. I would be really interested to see what happened from like the early 2000s to 2020 and gauge that, or probably like early 2000s to 2005 and then before obviously the 2008 crisis, and to see that number increase and then to see what the increase was from like 2020 to 2025. I would assume it's probably double, maybe more.
Yeah, it is.
So what questions should owners be asking themselves right now?
The best question you can ask yourself is, are my rent assumptions realistic? And one thing that I also offer to people is a rent study. So if someone is curious on how their rents compare, again, you can go to apartments.com. Sometimes you can go to Zillow. You could definitely go to like Craigslist and look, but it's just going to take time. And it might be easier if you just reach out to me and say, hey, I own 8 units in Eugene, or I own 10 units in Springfield. Give me the property address. And then I could do a quick summary in my database that I keep and ballpark you on what the rent should be. And I'm not going into in any of the units, so I don't know what the interior condition would be. I always try to look on like apartments.com and some of the public websites to see if I can see interior pictures. So it's just a general range, but that is definitely one thing owners should be asking. And then ask yourself, are my expenses outpacing my income? Because I see multifamily owners right now that are on the fence about getting out of the multifamily market because their net operating income is dropping and their expenses and liability are going up. And they're just having to ask themselves, does holding this still support my goals and my stress level, or do I want to do something different? So, having clarity around value changes really helps you kind of make that decision and decide where you want to set your sights going forward for your portfolio.
Yeah, and they can exchange or move into something more passive.
That's right. You can do a 1031 exchange, and you could go into a lease commercial property or something that is not multifamily regulated, where you don't have the government telling you don't have the government involved with rent
Yeah.
caps.
Yeah. What else would you say to multifamily owners today about this issue?
Probably the best thing, before we started this session, you and I talked about planning and just thinking ahead. And that's kind of how my brain works. And I love knowledge and just the little tidbits. So stay abreast of what's happening with property values. And like Brittany said, we've got the market snapshots that are available for both Eugene Springfield and the U of O. Those are properties that have sold in the last 12 months. We've condensed them into an easy snapshot that you could literally look at while you're drinking a cup of coffee or eating a bowl of cereal. And what we've done is we've broken it out by the amount of units, the price per unit, the sales price, and then the cap rate. And for me as a property owner, that is sort of like a Kelly Blue Book. That's telling me what my property value is worth. So then I know, okay, if I had to sell in the next 12 to 24 months and I see death, debt, divorce, life happens where all of a sudden people's, or maybe they're in partnerships with family, life changes and all of a sudden you have to make a quick decision or start thinking about, oh, I'm going to have to do something in the next 6 months because my brother wants out or my siblings want to do something else. So knowing that information in your brain to me is knowledge, because I already know, okay, here's what I think my property is worth. Here's where my rent is. This is my getting off point. So now I got to talk to a broker and find out, can you hit my number? And then the broker will tell you either, yes, here's what the value is. We could put it on the open market, or we could do a silent market. That's where we just put together the marketing information, but we don't put it out in the public market. We start talking to other brokers and people that we know that are buyers and give them an opportunity to know that it's out there and available. And then your tenants don't know that your property's out for sale. Your property manager doesn't know that you're going to potentially sell, but it gives you an opportunity to start putting the wheels in motion where you can talk to your 1031 exchange facilitator. You can come up with a plan with your family. Who wants to stay in the family membership? Who wants out? I have 3 different sets of clients right now that are going through that. All 3 sibling sets are aging. They're going different directions. And so we're going to sell properties this next 12 months, and they're all going in different directions, but that takes time. You don't wake up one day and say, oh, we're going to list it today. We're going to close in 30 days. That takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to put together that game plan.
Yeah, and we did just talk about that in one of our previous Multifamily Minute segments. We reviewed 2 case studies that you're currently working on right now where it's families or siblings and they're all going in different avenues and directions. So those were the last week's segments that came out. So please check those out and send us any questions that you have about those kind of situations where the families are going in different directions. So, is there anything else you want to add for the rent control or rent stabilization topic today?
What I'd just like to share with people is you can reduce your stress with knowledge, or at least that's how I reduce my stress. I take the uncertainty out by learning what I need to learn to have the knowledge to make decisions. And de-stressing gives you more stability, both financially as well as emotionally, and just freeing up mental space. So I would just really encourage you, from either, if you're hands-on management, maybe consider getting a property manager in place, because at the end of the day, it's all about the income that you're putting in your pocket. And 2026 can be an amazing year if you're paying attention and you know how to get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, totally agree. If you're listening and you want to understand how these topics specifically affect your property specifically, Renee is offering that free pinpoint price evaluation. So check our show notes for information about how you can get your free pinpoint price valuation on your property today. Also, like we mentioned in the show, you can also download that Eugene Springfield apartment market snapshot at apartmentpricereport.com. That's aptpricereport.com. And we have a U of O apartment market snapshot at uoapartmentprices.com. That's uoapartmentprices.com. All the links will be in the show notes for today's episode. And if this episode helped you, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts or YouTube. Screenshot your review and DM it to at René Nelson Real Estate on Instagram. Each month, we'll be doing a drawing for a chance to win a copy of Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. We love this book because his negotiation principles apply directly to multifamily investing, especially when you're navigating offers, inspections, and partnership conversations.
We should have Chris Voss on the show sometime. He is a former FBI negotiator. The dude is common sense and amazing. I've read that book probably 10 times.
Yes.
It's pretty cool.
Chris Voss, if you're listening, you'll be getting a DM from us.
That's right. That's true. Well, I'm René Nelson, helping you move forward from stress to stability and from hands-on management to hands-free income. See you next time, and thanks for listening.